Hello, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, I want to get on to the subject and explore with my guest media propaganda. We are in a very odd world, are we not? And the media drives the narrative, and the people en masse, it seems, follow that narrative, whether that narrative is actually the true narrative or one that's just made up for convenience or to follow a more nefarious thing. Who knows? So I want to get on to that now. My guest is Sean MaCleod. He's been on the show before. We were looking at vision and how you can improve your eyesight because he'd done it himself and he'd been showing other people. And in fact, I've been trying to do it myself, although with my artificial eye, it hasn't worked terribly well with that one. But my other one is doing quite well on that front. However, that's totally different. He's also written this remarkable book, and I've delved into it a bit, Behind the Wall of Illusion, about the Beatles. Now, you'll remember the Beatles. I'm sure if you're like me, a 60s child, you would have grown up with the Beatles. Your parents probably had a bit of Beatlemania, but may not have understood or known about the sort of different things that were going on. And maybe we can talk about that because that's all part of media propaganda. So, Sean, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me a second time round.
Yeah, I'm privileged. Actually, I was watching you introduce me there, and I thought I was watching a show myself, and I was thinking, oh, who's going to be the guest today?
Who's going to be the guest? I'm just going to adjust my chair, actually, because I feel like I've just shrunk down. So media propaganda is... I also should have mentioned here, and I've written it down, that you're a media analyst, somebody presumably then who studies what the media is up to and how it influences people. And I spoke there about narratives and thing. It is that the media do seem to be, especially at this day and age, the government's narrative provider. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Good, thanks very much. Well, anyway, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. So go on and tell me about the media propaganda and why we should be concerned, if at all.
Well, we could go on a bit of a journey, Richard.
I'm happy to go on a journey. I've got the tickets. I've got my bags packed.
A magical mystery tour.
Yes.
To promote,
so to speak. Promote the book, Behind the Illusion. Absolutely. The Wall of Illusion.
Behind the Wall of Illusion. Yeah.
I'll leave a link. Is it on that well-known name of a river book site that does this stuff?
It is. It's on.
It is. I will leave a link anyway in there so if people want to go and investigate. And why not? Actually, I should just say, here we go. Let me just read you a little bit on it so that people get a sort of an idea. The Beatles, it says on the back here, brought colour, joy, freedom and love to a grey post-war world. But the most successful group in popular music history also harboured hidden and sometimes darker worlds and influences that are often downplayed by their biographers. Clearly not this biographer. So we'll find out maybe a bit of that and why there would be hidden, why perhaps media people don't want these things to come out, and why people actually love to know about skeletons in people's cupboards, don't they? Yeah. They love it. They love it because it shows they're real, I guess. You know, if you put four blokes up on a stage dressed in ordinary, what looked like, you know, business suits in a way, not like today where you have to have sort of the most flamboyant suits made of meat or barely anything on. They were very respectable, pudding-based haircut, you know, kids. It's quite amazing.
It was quite radical, I think, at the time. You know, they were. Anyway, we'll start on the journey, and we'll hopefully end up at the Beatles book.
Right, I'm in your hands, sir.
So if we go back quite a bit, like there's propaganda been going on for millennia, really. But I think if we take it back to a man called Edward Bernays, have you heard of him?
No. Edward Bernays. What period of time are we talking about?
So do you want me? I have some. I know we have copyright issues here, but I have a picture maybe of him.
Oh, you can put a picture up.
You want to put a picture up?
Yeah, it's just music. That's the problem on YouTube.
Did you see that?
No,
What?
I
I
can't.
have
I can see you, but have you got it physically there?
it. No, it's on the screen.
All right. Okay. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll find it and put it up. What's his name?
Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays.
Hang on.
Bernays.
Hang on. Hang on. You're going too fast for a poor old man like me. Ed Ward.
Eddie Burney.
B-E. Oh, here we go. I've got it. Right. Let's see if we can find some images of him, and then we can stick them up on the screen. Let me do that now, as we come here and plonk that. Is that the right guy? First of all.
Yeah, well, there's one there with a propaganda.
Ah, right. Let's have a look. Click that. And let's just do. You see, I quite like that doing these things where we are live in. Well, we're not live, but it's pre-recorded as if live. So there he is, Edward Bernays propaganda. The man with the moustache. Do you trust a man with a moustache? I've just upset now some members of the audience. I don't mean to upset anybody, but there we go. And so, what period was he around? He looks
So
like he was around in the 50s, 60s.
yeah, well, he was the propagandist in America for World War during World War One.
Oh, was he? So around in the 20s, in the tens, 1910 to 20s.
Well, right, yeah, for he was around for a long time, and he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, good
Ah,
old,
right.
good old Ziggy Freud, and
So he's German, born in November 22nd. That'll be, we'll be celebrating his birthday then, 1891, and died in 1995. So he was he lasted some time, didn't he? 103.
yeah,
That's amazing.
November 2nd. Is he
It says here the 22nd, so that's
22nd?
Wikipedia.
Oh,
So they may have got it wrong.
no,
Somebody.
22nd, 22nd. Okay,
Oh,
so he was the propaganda in control of propaganda for World War One on the side of the Americans, and like when America entered the First World War after the sinking of the Lusitania,
mm,
which there's a whole lot of questions around that. But what they know, they did film, they did film people in a swimming pool basically to look like there was a lot of people drowning and to make the effect a lot more dramatic for these newsreels they would show.
so what? So it actually happened, but because they didn't have enough evidence or of the tragedy, they got people in the swimming pool and filmed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you can find that easily online, like so.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to do a quick look while I'm chatting, and so that was a propaganda machine to get America into the war. But I don't want to go too much into that because that's a whole lecture or talk in itself. But when the war ended, Bernays thought about how he could use basically propaganda to in peacetime.
Right. Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and so he basically developed what's called public relations, how to sell things to people, how to convince people that they need certain things.
Right. So he was the father
He's the
of.
father of
Yeah.
public relations, yeah, basically.
Right.
And so he had a lot of people in clients of his, politicians, movie stars, and he would often go to psychoanalysts and psychologists like his uncle. So he had asked his uncle at one point, apparently he'd sent him a nice box of Havana cigars, which Sigmund Freud liked to smoke, and asked him would he be interested in finding ways to manipulate people into buying products. But Freud was kind of disgusted at the idea and didn't really like America anyway, so he said no to that. But Bernays went on to use psychoanalytical tools to
Yes.
convince people to buy things. So some of the things he did, for example, there was one product. It was a cake mix that housewives would buy, and all they had to do was uh, just put this mix together, put it in the oven, and they would have an instant cake. But the product wasn't selling, so Bernays was asked by the advertisers how could they convince people to buy the mix, and he went to a psychologist, and the psychologist said, well, the housewives need to feel like they're participating somewhat in so they added onto it, just add an egg, and suddenly the product just began to
Oh,
fly
right.
off.
So that they could, when the husband came home, they could say, "I've cooked this," because they've done something.
Yeah,
They've added an egg. There we go.
yeah.
Look at
So
that. I'm now a
they,
chef.
they didn't feel like they were just cheating so much. They felt like
Yes.
they were,
Yeah.
participating in the baking. So things like this. But what's quite famous, and you can look this up. We can get a picture of this if you don't mind. And it's
No,
called
so
it's called Torches of Freedom.
torches of freedom.
Yeah, Torches of Freedom. So the third picture along, for example, there.
Okay. Let's just open that up.
So you can see they all, well, it's hard to see in that one, but maybe it's not a good picture because half bits of it are missing there. But these Debbie, that young lady. Maybe you could find a different picture. You could sorry, go if you go back up there. Yeah, this one here.
So very well you're saying this one here, right?
Yeah, that one.
That one with the dog.
Yeah,
Let's have a
same picture. It's the same picture. You can see in her hand a cigarette.
Yes, there it is.
So it wasn't socially acceptable at the time for women to smoke.
Right. Oh, I
So
see. So
Philip
they.
Philip Morris, the cigarette manufacturer, went to Edward Bernays and he said, we're losing we're losing a lot of income here because half the population is not smoking. So how can we get women to? How can we make it socially acceptable for women to smoke? So Bernays came up with this idea. So he had quite a number of people, debutantes, who were his clients, and he had corporations like Philip Morris who were his clients. So he just brought them together. He had people in the media, journalists who also worked closely with him or did him favors, and he would promote them and this kind of thing. So they
So really
decided
got them
to.
into the public, really, sort of showing these up, but not like we would see them now as. I mean, we are much more cynical because we know what's going on, perhaps.
Yeah,
But that's the first
but
time they'd ever seen it. Oh, look, they're smoking.
yeah,
Blimey.
but how he did it. So how he did this was interesting because he got these debutantes. There was a suffragette march, so we were into women's liberation and the right, and the right. They were looking for the right to vote. So these young debutantes were at. This is a suffragette rally that they're at, and along the march there was a point when the women were to stop, and they would all light up these cigarettes.
Right.
And then the headlines in the newspaper read "Torches of Freedom."
Oh, I see. Look, there's one woman.
Yeah, that's superimposed, I think, is it?
That is actually, yeah.
So there are. So this idea of torches of freedom, so it made it like sound like it was a suffragette movement. It was a political ideology, or had a political motivation, I should say.
Right.
But it wasn't. It was to sell cigarettes. But you couldn't, in America, argue with the idea that of torches for freedom. And why, Richard, could you not argue with that idea, do you think?
I don't know.
Well, because the Statue of Liberty and freedom is an American. It's a symbol of freedom. It's the American symbol. So if
Yes.
you are somehow were antagonistic towards the idea of torches of freedom, then you're antagonistic towards
Oh, I
ideas of
see,
freedom
because
and
the Statue of
liberation.
Liberty has a torch of freedom in its hand.
Yeah.
That's
So they
what
were
that is. Yeah.
related.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
get it. Yeah, no,
So
I understand.
so in order for you to be free and American, then you would smoke. Women would
Right.
smoke. And so this so
Just look for my pipe.
you can see how they've used these ideas to manipulate they weren't interested really in freedom. They were interested in getting women to spend money on cigarettes.
Yeah. And
And
like
this
all things, it's this commercial, very cynical. We're not really interested in the message that we tell you. We actually want you to spend money, and we get richer. Our
yes,
business grows.
that was the idea behind the public relations here. And also, you could see this happening throughout this period where so you had things like the good housewife who was told to stay at home and behave a certain way, and this was promoted in magazines, etc. And then when World War II happened, all the women had to go into work,
Yes.
but the men were off being shot at and shooting people. And so they had Rosie the Riveter, who was one of the pictures we came across there. The woman who has, she's got
Oh,
the
is that her name? Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter, yeah.
Let's see if we can find that. Keep going.
So now you had another, and if you can look at these pictures and see how they use these pictures, because the woman Rosie the Riveter she still looks glamorous. She still looks kind of like the housewife in a way, but she's now ready to go into the workplace and become part of the workforce. And you have all of these slogans here. We can do it. You
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah.
bit like the Nike thing. Just do it. Um, and you can see the American flag here as well, red, white, and blue, of course, on her clothing. So she's a patriot as well. So you can't really argue with these things. You can't really argue with. I mean, what I mean is the people of the time, they couldn't argue against this because it's patriotic. It's doing your duty during the war. It's promoting feminism. All of these things. But once the war ended, and they had a problem with the soldiers coming home after shooting people and being, if they didn't get shot themselves, they had to go back into the workforce. So they had to
Yes.
take them out of the workforce again and put them back into the home. And
Oh
so they
right. So
get
that's that. You see, back in the 50s, so it's like the Good Housewife of the 50s.
yeah, so Good Housekeeping magazine and stuff like this would have these whole so these are all from the 50s, these pictures. So it's again back into the home, back into the kitchen. Um so it's a huge amount of just propaganda. And not to say that being in the home or being a housewife or being out at work, these are all fine things for people to do if it's what they want to do,
Yes.
uh, rather than kind of being told that this is what you must do.
You're
Um,
you're influencing them by mass suggestion, aren't you? I mean, it is a hypnotic process.
yeah, it's very hard to argue against it, which is what we've really seen in the last couple of years. But we won't go there just yet. But um, so another thing, just to bring us up to, if you could search a picture for, and Richard, you probably know this, being a film buff that I know that you are,
Yeah.
Sergeant York with Gary Cooper. Have you seen this film?
I don't. I may have done. It doesn't immediately come to mind. Here we go. Sergeant York, Gary Cooper.
Yeah. So this is quite an interesting film. You can just bring up the picture poster for the film.
The poster, yeah. Hang on, where was it? There we are.
Yeah. So Howard Hawks made this film. So this film was supposed to be a biopic of a World War One soldier called Sergeant York, and this film was made in July. It was released in July 1941.
1941, right.
Yeah. And America, sorry, 42. It was released in July 42.
So midway, really.
Yeah, but America hadn't entered the war yet.
No.
America entered the war in September. Sorry, not in September. They were assisting the war effort in September 42, but they entered after Pearl Harbor in December 42. I think I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah.
So roughly around that time. So Sergeant York, I mean, it's not like today where a film comes and it's in the cinema for 3 days and it's gone again and something else is in. You know, these would have played for periods of time all over the American continent, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And what was happening when they played this film was young men were going down to the recruiting stations and signing up.
Gosh.
Because this was all, you know, he was a war hero. He took a whole German platoon on by himself, so the story goes. And yeah, it was a recruiting film, really. It won Cooper Academy Award. I mean, it's a good film in a sense, maybe a little bit out of date now, but again, it's a propaganda movie. And the interesting thing about this is, you know, if you make a film like this, as you know, Richard, like, I mean, you have experience of making films and being on television and that kind of thing. They don't just get made in a day.
No. Oh no. I mean, there's a whole, you know, well, depending on the budget of the film, but you're talking like 6 months to a year planning, and then however long it takes to make the film, and then the editing. So it can be 2 to 3 year process.
Yeah, it can be. Now, I don't know when they started to make this film, but you know, to me, it's now to me it feels like it was made intentionally. So they had to make it sometime before 1942, possibly at the start of World War One. You know, they probably had they could probably do it quite quickly. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I mean, I think a number of propaganda films came out and were turned around in like 6 to 7 weeks.
Yeah,
because they, as you said, I mean, you design it so it was easy to film and use stock footage and stuff, rather than the elaborate sort of big blockbusters that we see today.
Yeah,
so that's absolutely, yeah.
And one of the things about this film which is interesting is, because even though the Americans, some might say, I'm being very diplomatic with my language, that some might say that, you know, they're quite aggressive. You know, they're aggressors rather than defenders of countries. And but Americans themselves are not particularly interested in a lot of ways in what goes on outside of America. And probably this is true for a lot of countries. But America is so huge, you know, it's not a country, it's a continent. It's bigger than Europe. So a lot of middle America, and particularly around the Bible Belt areas, and we, you know, are not particularly so interested in what's going on outside of America, or their own hometown, really, you know. And I think getting them into a war is not so easy. Because why do they want their sons and daughters to go, or their sons particularly, to go off and be killed?
Well, I mean, this is, you know, a question that a lot of people ask. Why are people soldiers and go off and then possibly come back in a wooden box? Why would you do that? Unless, of course, you felt you were under threat.
Yeah, so they have to create this idea, particularly in America, which I mean, if you want to have an argument about it, but really, the Anglo-American establishment as what's his name, the historian Carol Quigley wrote about, um, is the dominant force in our modern culture. It is everywhere. I mean, we're all listening to American music and British music or American films, wearing American clothing, eating hamburgers, and so
Speak for yourself, of course.
it is.
Young.
It is the. I don't eat hamburgers, but it is.
No.
It is the dominant culture, if it is even a culture in a way. But so they do have the power. They are very powerful, and they're very powerful in economic sense as much as the military sense, America. But they can't just go into these countries and do whatever they want. They need the support of the people. So they manufacture consent, which was a book that Noam Chomsky wrote. He talked about manufacturing consent. There's a load of question marks I would have over Noam Chomsky as well, but even still, he recognized the fact that America needs to manufacture consent. In other words, get the consent one way or another from the public to support them going into these countries. And in actual fact, I think, the Americans, if you've ever been in America, I've been in America a few times and I've American relations, and I had a very good friend who was from New York, and they're very, very, a lot of them are just very sweet people, very nice, friendly, get on like everyone else. They're sometimes I think there's an impression that they're very aggressive because we watch so many. We've grown up on these American movies and American TV shows where everybody's getting killed, and it's
not if it's the A team. They get blown up, but somehow they manage to stand up afterwards and just look a bit dazed. Oh, so that's But you're right. I'm being facetious.
There's a violence, a cartoon violence there. But
and we don't have that in Britain. I mean, that's a big contrast there, isn't it? That everything's bigger, the tanks are bigger, the ships are bigger, the explosions are bigger, and in Britain, mostly the serious stuff that we make is quite gritty. And more gritty, personal, isn't it? Gritty and personal, and the camera is more close up on the individual, whereas and this is obviously a broad stroke, but in the American stuff, it's much wider, bigger, panoramic sort of shots with big explosions, and if you're doing violence and stuff, whereas our violence is much more cerebral, isn't it? People are, they might use knives and things and things like that, but you don't go round with guns and things so much, or if you do, it's a one, like James Bond and stuff. It's like that's it, just one shot. It's a very measured type of imagery that you get from so I'm just contrasting the two to sort of back up what you were saying.
Yeah, I think it's quite gritty British, and it's become a lot more violent, I think, in more recent years than it was
right.
British cinema
and more, but violent in a more physical or in a more hand-to-hand way than the American stuff seems quite spaced. I mean, that's with rifles and guns and whereas I think British stuff seems to be more close up, smaller, and a lot more. The violence is more visceral.
Yeah, well, probably the budget as well, Richard.
But absolutely, no, I agree. Yeah, the budget.
They can blow
up more things.
Yeah, but so I think a lot of Middle America. So this film was very much talking to, actually the very kind of conservative, read your Bible kind of public in America, because Sergeant York in the film, he starts off as a kind of he's a black sheep of the family. He drinks because for various reasons, but then he finds God, and he really he becomes a churchgoer, and then suddenly it's the war, and he's conscripted, and he doesn't want to fight because he's
He's a peaceful man.
yeah, he's a conscientious objector. And so his sergeant, who very kindly says, well, why don't you take, a couple of days a week and go home and think about it, and which I don't think would maybe doesn't sound like, really a sergeant that you would
In real life.
realize maybe.
It's like, go home, put your feet up for a bit, have a chat, and come back and do some more killing.
Yeah, so
Oh, yeah, righto.
he's up in this mountain with his dog, and he's reading his Bible, and he puts the Bible down, and a page blows open, and he reads, "Give unto God what is God's, and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's." So, in other words, he doesn't have any more this conflict in himself.
There he is on the mountain.
That's him with his Bible, reading his Bible. So he doesn't have this conflict within him. So it gives the idea that it's justified to go to war.
Right.
God says it's okay because this is what we have to do when we're in the earthly realm. And as I said, all these young men went down and they signed up after seeing this film. And maybe that's a lot of speculation about that. But what is interesting is that Howard Hawks, who made that film, was a member when he was in his university with the Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity. And these are these, fraternities in these high-profile schools. Who we had, George Bush was a member of that fraternity.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, and quite a number of people, well-known political people, were members of that. So, it's really a question. I think, although people can take this as they will, but there's a lot of factors there that seem to have all kind of fallen into place in a way to support this idea of as being a propaganda film, whether it was intentionally so, but I would say it probably was, but it was definitely used then to motivate the country. But
because of that, I'm just sort of moving us on for time. Presumably, that if it was successful, then people are going to think, well, we'll make more of this because we can really manipulate. We've seen how the mass propaganda has manipulated people to stay indoors, support the NHS, take certain medical interventions in recent times, and they have been manipulated again without using critical thinking and common sense. We've seen the nefarious use of that. It may have been justified in the Second World War, do you think? But now
I don't think so, because I think the Second World War, like the First World War, was manipulated.
Right. Okay.
Very intentionally.
Yeah.
You can bring up. I actually have the book here. This is a book called "Mapping the Millennium."
Mapping the Millennium.
Yeah. Sorry, I just get that right.
It's fine. Let's see if I can. Oh, hello. I've gone back to some earlier pictures here. Let's see if I can find that. Mapping the. It would help if I got the spelling. How do you spell millennium? M-I, isn't it?
M-I-L-L.
Something like that. Here we go. Images. Mapping the millennium. There's a nice image to look at.
Yeah.
Behind the plans for the New World Order. Right. Okay.
Yeah, so this is Terry Boardman, who's a good friend of mine, who I recommended you to have on to give a talk one time. But this what he has shown here in the front cover is it's called the Kaiser's Dream, and it is you can see on that map, if you could bring that up, that cover, where you have the Russian desert. You see that? So
yeah.
This is from a magazine from 1870.
Oh, hang on. I can do this better. I just go to the wrong. There we go. Yes.
Yeah, so
So this is from 1870, did you say? Yes.
this map is from a magazine called Punch magazine, and
Yeah.
you can see there where it says desert.
Yeah.
Above that is the word Russia. So this is Russian. Yeah, this is the Russian desert. So what this map is kind of this what Terry is saying here. So this book is about magazines, publications that shows various maps over the years throughout the particularly he's focused on the last 200 years. And so this is from 1870, where they had already started to plan for Russia to become a desert. In other words, they wanted to destroy Russia.
Oh, right. And who's the they? That some global.
Yeah, well, who the they um, well, you could read that book.
Right.
In a way, it is Britain basically wanted to destroy Russia because it didn't want Germany and Russia to form an alliance because they'd be Germany would be too powerful. So they
Right.
wanted to Russia. They wanted to bring Russia and Germany into a war,
And they did.
and they did. And this is planned from 1870, even before that.
Wow. So these things, I mean, it just goes to show you how long in the planning these things are.
Yeah, way.
I mean,
Way,
beyond people's life, the planners who plan that are beyond, it's beyond their life.
This is a book called A Transcendental Universe, which, yeah, can you see that?
Yeah.
So this is by a guy called
C.G. Harrison.
Harrison. So this was a lecture given in 1896 on occult science, theosophy, and the Catholic faith, it was called, to a group called the Berian Society. And again, this is outlining plans for the future to bring about the destruction of Russia in a way.
And why did they want to get rid of what was bad about Russia at that time that they didn't like? They just saw them as a foe or
Well, there's a few reasons.
competition.
We're kind of going away from the point, but there's a few reasons.
Right. Well, stick to the point. I'm just asking.
As I said there earlier, Richard, the Anglo-American culture is the dominant culture today.
Yes.
And before that, we had Greece and Rome. That was the dominant culture. In other words, the strongest inspirations are working through those particular cultures. And we can see that in Greek philosophy, and then the Roman civilization, and before that it was Egypt, etc. And these cultural periods last 2,100 years.
It's quite a precise number, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's all connected to your heartbeat and to it's man is a microcosmic of the cosmos. So 2,100 years is the amount. It's called a Platonic year. It's the time it takes for the sun to go through the zodiac, all 12 constellations.
So are we close to the end of this one then?
This one started. When do you think this one might have started?
At the end of the Roman Empire?
Well, we had a thing called the Renaissance.
Right, yeah. When are we talking about? 16 something or other?
Yeah, a bit before that. So that's called, Renaissance means rebirth.
Right.
And we started to come into more kind of intellectualism, materialistic side.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We developed perspective in art. One of your people you had on talking there the other day was talking about capitalism, etc. We started to develop an individuality. I talked about this before with the eye. We started coming into ourselves. Before that, we weren't really individuals. We started to be able to think for ourselves, and we start to become responsible for ourselves. And that means one of the things that happens with that is we start to accumulate stuff, property.
Right. That only happened 500 years ago. Then, so you're 2000. So we're still in that this new thing. It's not, because some people say, oh, these empires, they only last for 200 and something years, but this is a much wider thing.
Yeah,
This
not
being based on.
necessarily. Yeah, so the Austrian-Hungary Empire only lasted for so long, but that impulse from Germany is the seed of the English. They take on this impulse,
Mm.
and then it became Anglo-American. So the Americans are really stronger but it's the same impulse working through this Anglo-American um, epoch that we're in. And there is a feeling, in a way, that you see the Russians will take on the next impulse. And this is what they call the city of Philadelphia, the time of Philadelphia. This is, in a way, the Aquarian age, where we'll have developed, you were reading from the book there, to transform the world into love. So it's a period of that, a period of where people will be more in harmony, in a way, with each other. That's the kind of idea. And the Anglo-American impulses will not be so powerful anymore. And some people suggest that they still want to influence. They want to influence how the basically occult brotherhoods in the West want to influence how things are in the future. So there's always been this keeping Russia out of the picture, in a way. They don't want it to develop in a certain direction.
And what would be the Russian propaganda or perspective or dominant thoughts then? That if we were allow it to go, or it's going to happen anyway, what would be that we would look forward to?
Yeah, as I said, that would be the period of what they call the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love.
Right.
So
because that's not the image. I mean, clearly that's not the image that we get from Russia, is it? We get the idea that it's communistic and it's oppression and all of that. But actually, you see that they're much more to do with family. And Map in the Millennium comes up again. On, let's just flow it one more time. Because
in 1870 they were planning to destroy Russia.
Right. So they told us. So basically, are you saying that what we see in the media, of course, is this narrative again, a false narrative, because they want to continue to influence us in the Anglo-American way, rather than what the Russians would say is their way, which is peace and love.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they haven't developed it yet themselves, but it's a period in the future. It's in the future. But as we say, these things take a long time.
Yes.
Well,
2000 and yeah.
And they're not like people necessarily like myself or average Joe. They're very what in esoteric understandings of it, we call the brotherhoods. So there's white brotherhoods and there's dark brotherhoods. Some work against the development of humanity, and others the white brotherhoods work for the development of humanity. And I would say the media is very much under the control of dark brotherhoods, who you wouldn't know who they were.
Mm.
They don't really parade themselves out in public. They are beyond that kind of thinking.
So the people that you see and you think you see who are stirring the pot are not the ones at all. They're all puppets just there to sort of give us a false illusion.
Yeah, and so I mentioned Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley wrote a book. He's a very interesting man. He wrote a book called The Anglo-American Establishment and Tragedy and Hope. And he was given access. He was a historian. He was a mentor to Bill Clinton, actually. And you can see interviews with Quigley online. And he wrote this book called Tragedy and Hope because he had access to these elite groups and what they were planning. The Council of Foreign Relations, the Rhodes scholarship trusts, all of these groups, Trilateral Commission, etc., etc. So it starts with Cecil Rhodes, this idea. Do you know Cecil Rhodes?
Yes.
So Cecil
Well, I
Rhodes.
don't know him personally, obviously, but I know of him.
Yeah, so he was a very wealthy man, and he believed that the British culture should dominate the world. So we don't want to go too much into his background, but he basically set up. And this is not conspiracy theory. These are facts. He set up what he called the council. He set up the Rhodes Group.
The Rhodes Group, yeah.
Yeah, you can probably find that.
I'm just trying it.
This was basically, he gave all his wealth to establishing this dominance of British cultural influence around the world. And so he took people like Bill Clinton, who went on these Rhodes scholarships, were basically indoctrinated into this way of thinking, the Anglo-American establishment. And certain groups were formed within this, which were, as I said, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, eventually would say the United Nations and groups like this.
Yeah.
And this was to promote this kind of this way of thinking, British way of thinking, this very quite materialistic way of thinking, and so these constantly were trying to. These people would know that these things will happen in the future, and so they prepare well in advance for it. And there's quite a number of scholars who have written on this. James Corbett, who is well known, has written quite a lot, not necessarily on that subject, but how British and Anglo-American forces were behind World War One, behind the funding of the Nazis as well, behind bringing the foundation of the USSR. So there's this they work both sides of things, to bring about certain outcomes.
So well, sorry, I just wanted to sort of, I mean, we're skirting. I want to get back to your book and because you're getting to the.
This brings us back to the book now, actually.
Right. Okay. Well, I was just thinking they're doing that. They're doing all this deep planning, but the media propaganda is what, through newspapers and television and influencing people. And I guess what I was trying to sort of get to is there no pushback from people as they work this out, as they realise and go, stop watching the television, stop reading the news, stop listening to the narrative, and it can't happen. Why should we allow these people to form these things so that wars don't happen if people aren't influenced by Sergeant York and they weren't watching the if people weren't doing those things? If people are manipulated, then if you take away the tools of that manipulation, they can't be manipulated, can they?
No, but it's very deep. The manipulation is very deep. And it brings me to the book, because I can explain with the book.
Go for it.
So the Beatles came along.
All you need is love. Love is all you need. Okay, that's one other one. I want to hold your hand. There we are. A few.
And all you need is love. Yep. This is a really important message, because to counteract this very dark force, which is we could have a whole other discussion on that. Yes. The fall of the spirits of darkness, which is something we could do at a later time. But what we can do is counteract it with love. But that's not so easy. And I think in the 60s, they had an idea of this, Who? What?
Who had the idea?
The culture at the time started to generate the idea, popular culture. So with all you need is love, and these ideas.
Yeah. To sort of push back against the manipulation that they were doing.
Yeah. So the world we live in is it has beauty. in it.
Yeah.
It has love in it. It has these things. And it has a shadow side to it.
Mm.
Uh, and sometimes the shadow takes over. And I think what happened with the Beatles, so the Beatles arrived on the scene more or less around the end of 1962, beginning of 63. And it was very important in the sense of Britain found itself again after World War II. It started to become a kind of have a cultural significance again that it didn't have for a long time. Um, and it was very much a youth culture as well, I think. So you had the Beatles, you had James Bond, you had, um, a lot of working class actors that suddenly rose to prominence, and they were also all working class as well, which is very interesting because before that, the working class didn't really have much of an influence in anything. They didn't really have much of an identity in a way, you know?
Right.
And you can see in those old films that you're kind of fond of, those old British comedies, where the working class was a kind of just, either a crook who kind of got everything wrong, you know, and the more, uh, you know, heroic figures were more upper class, this kind
How
of Dirk
so, chap?
Bogart. Yeah, well,
That's so
Terry Thomas
sharp.
was
Yeah.
and, and then you had this 60s change where you had the working class hero
Mm.
like Albert Finney in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, or Richard Burton, or people like that, or Richard Harris. These working class figures started to dominate the scene, and the Beatles did too. And it was also, they were creating their own art. They were the
Yes.
creators. They were inspired in a way. And I think this really they started to permeate through the American, European culture as well. And I think in a way it started to heal the problems that the war had brought between Germany and Britain, between America and Germany and Japan. And they kind of healed this in a way, or to some extent contributed to that. But they were also manipulated into forming this stronger Anglo-American alliance, which needed to happen after World War One, because Britain had kind of destroyed itself as well.
After
And
World War One or two?
after World War One, they
Oh,
were kind
right.
of bankrupt, and so they needed to form an alliance with the American, wealthy, where like Churchill, for example's mother was American heiress, as far as I'm aware. So they married into the American. So the British wanted the aristocratic aspect that Britain could bring, and they wanted this kind of like, fair play kind of veneer that Britain brought. Because, and then their money and aggression was what the Americans brought into this relationship. So in a way, the Beatles were kind of manipulated a little bit to form this bond between Britain and America, I think. And then so then things started to spread out a bit more. People started to become young people really, and they started to have this kind of and the kind of in a democratic sense, they started to have this kind of experience of they were more than just this is my place and this is my lot, and that's all.
Mm.
Just shut up and be grateful. And people started to explore things, not just being able to travel and to be artistic and creative, but they started to be able to have a kind of inner experience, I think. Deeper inner experience of themselves and their place in the world, etc. And one of the things that kind of sparked that was psychedelic drugs. So they could see the world differently. They didn't accept it as the way it was before. They had a kind of a transformation of consciousness. But
Which I suppose, if you're taking psychedelic drugs, and there's a huge illustration of that sort of effect, I suppose, on the cover there. That's the sort of 60s imagery of it. If you're taking that, then you're not so easily manipulated by the powers that be. They say, well, this is what you've got to have, the ideal housewife, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and all of that. because
Well,
they're kind of going, oh no, actually, all you need is love.
yeah, well, it kind of breaks the shackles of that, and the idea
Right.
was to connect on a higher level with, with the cosmos, and that we're all one, and this idea.
Mm,
But there's a shadow side to that as well.
of course.
And the shadow side to that was, which is quite interesting. So we're back to this media propaganda.
Mm.
Was that um, so LSD was came into the culture around mid 60s, and I have a feeling to a large extent the Beatles were used in a way for this very nefarious plot that went on behind the scenes, which here now we have a couple of more images, and then we can kind of end on this. But if you could look up a chap called Henry Luce, Luce.
Henry Luce. Here we go.
Yeah.
And his hat.
And his hat. Now, Richard,
Yes.
question for you.
Okay. Far away.
What have Henry Luce and the Beatles got in common?
They've both got eyebrows. He's got particularly heavy eyebrows. I've no idea. What have they got in common?
I say. What have Henry Luce and the Beatles got?
I don't know. What do they have in common? They must have. Surely they've got something. I mean, they're all male. He's older than them, presumably. I don't know who he is. What have they? Put me out my misery. What have they got in common?
Life, Richard, life.
Oh, life. Of course, they're all alive.
Well, it's actually Life magazine.
Oh, right. Not Time. There's Time magazine. Look.
Yeah, well, he owned Life magazine, and he owned Time magazine, and he owned Sports Illustrated, and he was a media tycoon.
Right. Okay.
Is the word, I suppose, to describe him.
I just tried. Here we go. There's a bit of Life magazine.
Oh.
Just looks like the Beatles. That bit.
Yeah, four Beatles. So what happened was there was another chap who we could look up a picture of called Robert Gordon Wasson.
Hang on a minute. There they are on the Life magazine. Look at that from 1964.
Yeah, when they arrived in England, in America. So promoting the Anglo-American establishment again.
All happy and smiling.
Yeah. So you can look up a guy called Robert Gordon Wasson.
Oh, thanks. There's a name for you. Robert Gordon Wassup.
Wasson, W-A-S-S.
Oh, Watson. Oh, right, okay. Is that him?
There you go, Life magazine again. And what's that called? What's it say? The discovery
on the Life magazine?
Yeah.
Seeking magic mushroom.
Yeah. So Robert Gordon Wasson, who do you think Robert Gordon Wasson might be?
Who do I think he is?
Who do you think he might be? Yeah.
Is he a drug dealer?
One of amongst other things.
Is he an owner of a rival magazine? No.
Yes.
Is he
Soma.
an apothecary? He's a soldier.
Soma. You see this Soma picture? Soma.
Sober.
Soma.
Oh, Soma. Oh, here we are. Is he? Oh, okay. So did he discover a mushroom?
Yeah.
Mushroom of immortality.
Yeah. So this is where it gets a bit interesting now, Richard.
Here we go. It says here, Robert Gordon Wasson was an American author and there's something or other, and vice president of public relations at J.P. Morgan and Co. Oh, here we go. Yep. And he made various contributions in the field of botany and anthropology and this ether, but presumably has written a book that says this particular mushroom can keep you alive forever. Is that what the Beatles were influenced then? I'm jumping ahead. So
Robert Gordon Wasson was the public relations vice president of public relations to J.P. Morgan.
Uh-huh.
Do you think he's going to be that interested in creating anything wonderful for humanity, really?
No, not really. Not
He's
J.P.
public
Morgan.
relations officer. Public relations. So we're back to
Conning the public into thinking something is better than it really is.
well, we're back to Edward Bernays. So apparently he wrote this article on magic mushrooms in
Mm.
1957. And this started the whole interest in psychedelics, which before that had Albert Hoffman, who was the person who had taken psilocybin, the element ingredient from the mushroom that they would use then for the psychedelic experience. And you had people like Aldous Huxley. Do you know this
Yeah,
name?
yeah, yeah. Aldous Huxley, he did a thing about glasses and eyes called The Art of Seeing. I've got his book somewhere.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, but he also wrote a book called Brave New World, in
He
which
did. He's more famous for that one than The Art of Seeing, I grant you.
yes, yeah, in which people would learn to love their servitude,
Yeah.
and they would take the drug Soma,
Mm.
which we just saw in a book there by Robert
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, yeah. It's like Soylent Green, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
and what would they do? They would be blissed out on drugs, and they would just be in a state of non activity in a way.
yeah.
And Yuval Harari, this Noah Yuval Harari, who's the one of the advisors to our friend Klaus Schwab, who is all these books on transhumanism
Yeah,
and says, well, what are we going to do with all the people who can't do anything when everything is automated? Give them drugs and computer games.
yeah.
That will keep them happy. So Robert Gordon Wasson wrote this article in Life magazine, which then you had people like where he went to Mexico apparently and met a woman called Maria Sabine, who was a shaman, and she initiated him into the psychedelic experience. And then people like Timothy Leary, Ken Kesey, these were figures in the 60s, psychedelic figures, who promoted the use of psychedelics for a psychedelic experience. But if we go back to Henry Luce, who
Yes.
owned Life magazine, he wanted America. His idea was to make America this kind of imperialistic nation. It would influence everything. And the way to do that was to dumb people down, basically.
Mm.
So
And they still, I mean, they still. I'm going to have to wrap this up because we're over an hour. But I'm sorry to say, because it's absolutely fascinating. But so I mean, that's still the plan, isn't it? To dumb us down, or they've done a very good job of dumbing
yeah,
us
so
down.
so you're saying, just to finish now, we suppose we might as well finish on this, is like, how do you break out of this conditioning? Because the
Yes.
Beatles, who some people will say they were manufactured from the start, etc., etc. I don't think that's true. I think they were an initial impulse, very positive impulse, with very, basically ordinary guys who had, let's face it, some kind of talent, that when it
Yeah.
all came together, because they were lucky enough for it all to come together, and for some kind of karmic relationships there between those people. But they're not unlike ordinary people who had some gift that they used, and they were able to channel it, and they had each other there to help, and they had other forces that worked with them. But this then got taken over and manipulated, I think,
Mm.
and they used them to promote LSD and to promote a certain way of thinking.
So,
Unfortunately, they didn't realize this. I think
so
they.
had. Yeah, sorry, because I do want to. Unfortunately, I do want to end this on this as quickly as I can, and I don't mean to be mean, but and I know people say, "No, no, we got to go," but I have another appointment to go to,
Yeah.
unfortunately. How do we push out of this then? What's in just a couple of lines? How do we push out of this? What is the secret? What is the secret, Sean?
Well, one of them is to keep doing what you're doing, to
Right,
become
great.
conscious of what you're doing, and to keep doing these things. And that's all you can do really at the moment, isn't it? Be you're conscious now. You're conscious now of the situation,
Yes,
and now
yes.
you work in that direction.
So and then you've helped there by educating us and showing us how mass propaganda has been used and we've been manipulated. And you can see that the one world government types who want to keep us, as you've just alluded to, want to continue to carry on, but with more technological advances of keeping us drugged and using computer games, etc., etc. However, this is a fascinating book, ladies and gentlemen. You also find out whether Paul McCartney was actually murdered, or replaced, or when he had an accident replaced, and you'll get into all of the controversy of all of that. And you round them up at the end. I looked at that just before I came in because I always think, start at the front, do the end. And you go through each of the. I can't find it now because there's so many references, and it's a very well written and easy to read book, ladies and gentlemen. I'm doing the best bit, but you go through all of them, ending up with Ringo. But I noticed you never mentioned Thomas the Tank Engine once, which is a bit of a shame because that seemed to me to be the pinnacle of his career. But there we are. Pardon?
That's part 2.
That's part 2, yes. What happened to them next? Sean, I'm sorry to end very rapidly. I know people are going to hate me for it. But what a fascinating journey through history and through the use of the internet on this recording. But I do have to disappear, unfortunately. I'll leave a link to it. It's fascinating stuff. You've also promoted some other books in there, which I hope that you get a big deal from your mates on. I
won't. It's not really to promote the book.
No, I know. You're using the book as a landing ground to talk about what's been happening. I absolutely appreciate that. But it has been a wonderful hour, and I thank you very much. And we'll have to do a part 2 where we go in and find out what is these dark shadows and how we can push against them.
Yeah, that's a very tricky one, but we could.
Well, I may be over in Ireland anyway. You're persuading me to come over, so I may be over there. We could do that face to face.
We could do a lot of things, chats over here. There's lots of interesting people doing interesting things.
Absolutely. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, Sean MaCleod, do check his book out. Link in the description. Thank you, Sean, for being my wonderful guest today. It's been absolutely enthralling. And I've learnt a lot. So there you go. I'm going to go and find my magic mushrooms now and plant them in the garden. Until next time, from the lovely Sean. What?
Just to say, Richard, not to be promoting any of these things. They're not.
No, I'm not promoting it. I know. I don't know where you'd buy a magic mushroom. I've no idea. Me, I say absolute sure. Possibly imagine I would do such a thing. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. From Sean and I, till next time, goodbye.
Thank you.